Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 4th of December. Well, we were right above that 50%. We hit the 61 in the pre-market gap up and then finished right in the middle of it. It had started to pull back a pretty decent retrace of that move, and then you can see they're filling that back in right to the 50. In fact, we came all the way back down to just above the algo, which was also the ABM yellow line right there. Cyan is below red, so we're still in a continuation of that, but you've had the dip of the steel, rising of the orange, and that's cut off the tongue too. So in essence, your shorts, well, your long snake has sort of ended, and this is some of that consolidation. So not surprised to get a little bit of weakness back and forth, but overall should still be fine. Of course, program note of Wednesday, markets will be closed, so it'll be interesting action today simply because they have the George Bush funeral, so it's closing everything off for that. And amazing, NQ, pretty darn close to exactly what the S&P, and that's sort of that evening out we talked about that would take place. Euro hovering right around that 23%, put in this little teeny buy, which was rejected almost immediately. And right now you just have softening of shorts. They're below zero with the cyan, and that's a little bit of the closing there. And then you have the midterm buyers and short-term buyers kind of flat. So it's keeping that right in line. And of course, as a little bit of the selling and stuff was happening, a little flight to treasuries for safety purposes. And of course, oil, a little bit of pop. This isn't going to go anywhere because that's disaster as far as the chart goes. And gold starting to elevate a little bit. Interesting, given the fact that you're seeing treasuries rising and gold. So a little bit more fear is starting to creep into the market. This was the end of day action on the 5K, as you can see, put in a very nice sell right around this previous 2793 algo level, and it was a great pre-market short. This little pop right now is probably just going to get overdone right around the 50. You can see it dip below the red line, so we're probably going to come back to these lows. Though it's running pretty decent, this is fairly good. And this, the beauty of this is when you get this kind of move of the orange below the red with the green cross, at the same time you get the steel cross. The problem was this one was making new lows, but by the time you get into the next couple of bars at the 23%, you can see that the green is still well in advance. So in this case, for the long to end, the short would have already had to have eclipsed the green. That didn't happen, and now that green is above cyan, you have that double whammy as well. So this may have a little bit more to go. If we scroll back into the day's action, it was quite nice. It's pretty good there. So we ended up with quite a few solid signals off of the monster gap. Let's go back to the monster gap up. I know we gotta go a long way. So all the way back here. So the 93 was the positive extreme from this initial move, and then boom, we ended up with a bunch of other ones, and then we started to get the earliest signals, which was the orange crossing at the same time, green was coming below, and then you ended up with a much deeper dip of the steel. Could you have said the same thing around this one? Yeah, almost. It just didn't quite have the corresponding breakdown that was starting to occur in the shakeout. Here the shakeout was rising, here it peaked, and this was already starting to make lower ones. So that's the subtle difference, though I warned you about having the orange above the plus 15, and in this case above the plus 25, so it was way up there. And that was just by reference. You can see all these positive extremes going across here on there. But I added the MBI indicator in there because it also is a good one to point to, because when you start to see the green cross below there, and then particularly when you end up with that cyan line breaking around the 70, it usually indicates a little bit more of a decline. And that's what we started to get, a little mid-range, and then it stayed pretty much flat going through. But the problem is that you ended up with more short signals and no reset of orange or of steel, which meant continuation. and continuation meant a little bit lower, and that's exactly what happened. So it made it quite easy. And when I get these kind of initial dips off the red, usually that first buy I'm really not all that interested in, because normally it retraces back to the low. It's the second pivot that you're looking for that tends to have a little bit more value. So this move right over here figured would have a little bit more, though it wasn't looking all that great, because when you get crossovers here on the MBI that are above that little purple line, that's not usually going to happen from a long standpoint. You can see we ended up with a beautiful DOC spread, and then boom, it started to decline. And interesting, because we look for this as a warning that, hey, maybe that short softening, but you'd need to see green over red for that to be of major consequence. And then, of course, opened up to a new short snake right there, and that, of course, led to a very, very nice decline, which really pretty much stayed in decline mode till we started to get all the way through here. And then we ended up with, again, a little bit, it's the first dip, but it's a higher pivot than this previous one from way back over here, kind of ignoring the high bounce. So from the broader standpoint, it was a little bit more attractive from a buy standpoint, right here at the 77. And that actually led to a move up near the 50%, and then even a little bit higher. Did a partial retrace and then got up to the peak here, and then produced another little DOC spread combination. It actually started right there with the opening of the short snake. Then cyan fell underneath for just a brief moment and then repeated itself all right about the 61% range, and then we dipped all the way to 23 before catching the same. Of course, it's interesting because the first crossover happened right here. There was no orange, and in the next bar you finally did get the orange. Now it only moved another zone plus before the rejection with the cyan. Right about there. Popped up briefly and then came back and retested again before putting another reset back in place, only to pretty much consolidate up at the peak with relatively weak setup. I mean, when you're at these highs, you're expecting to have cyan under red and floating up there, so you know that you're just sort of on borrowed time. And these little resets, they kept getting rejected like pretty quick, so you get the buy signal there, and then when the orange is above, you already know that you're beginning weak mode right there. And sure enough, I love it when they do that little last pop right before you get the serious cross of the cyan above. And in this case, the orange came from above, crossed, and the green crossed below it at the same time crossing red, which to me, I love those kinds of setups where you're getting all your little indications pretty close to the same time. The only thing you didn't have was the steel, and that's just because there was no steel reset for new long setup, interestingly enough. Same thing here. This is what tells you that you're not going to see this. Now that it's above 13.5, gives it a little bit more legs, but once it comes back down, particularly below the negative, the positive 7.5, that's really going to accelerate the decline. So those are things worth noting on that. You can do the same thing with the MBI here when it's following a longer trend. The longer this stays above without the green crossing back below, kind of lets you know, it gives you the same similar cursor read as the DOC with in longer trends. The problem with following straight MBI on that is you'll get some false fade outs a little early, but that's where it's helpful to see the shakeout if it's starting to break down or not. Makes a really strong combination. I'm adding it into some of the setups that develop with the DOC, so that you don't even have to think about any of these things. It's just going to pop up and you'll know it based on the colors and that. So all in all, really good action. We'll keep at it. I'll keep posting more charts as they're relevant. As always, trade well. We'll talk to you later.